The following is a Spirit Street production.
All right. Well, the Big 12 Conference has basically gone through a gigantic facelift over the past 10, 14 years or so. The main thing is, let's talk about today, or what we're going to talk about today is how we got here, what the teams have looked like since that they have left, and what the Big 12 is going to look like in the future. And is the Big 12 better off with the teams that have left, gone? Is the conference going to look better? This is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Big 12 Insiders. This is your man, Big B, Brien Hanley, along with Tim Fitzgerald. Fitz, how are you doing today, my man?
I'm good, brother. Just recorded our own podcast, so a busy day in the studio, but I'm looking forward to this because I'm fascinated with the Big 12 survival.
Yeah.
And how it shouldn't have, but here we are. And why did this happen? And how good is the conference?
Yeah.
A lot of people in the nation want to say the fourth best, and the only reason why it's fourth is there's not a fifth. I don't agree with that, but we can get into how we ended up here. Right. And how those schools have fared that departed, because I think it tells us a lot about was that a good move or not for those schools.
Right. Well, the first thing, how the Big 12 survival, the one word that comes to my mind is karma.
Yeah.
Because all of this started with the Pac-12 basically poking around saying that they were going to take teams away from the Big 12.
You got it.
That they were going to expand. They were looking at Texas. They were looking at OU. They were basically coming to raid the Big 12, just coming to raid the Big 12 and take who they could take and move forward that direction. The Big 12 was on shaky ground. I mean, it was. It just was. And then things started to fall apart on that avenue. They took Colorado. Colorado started to leave. But I guess to back up a step from there is, Fitz, the reason that the Big 12 was on shaky ground was because of what was going on behind the scenes, right, and how much the teams were getting. The uneven split. The schools were upset with the amount of revenue that they were receiving. Some schools receiving more than others. They didn't like that. And that's basically how we got to all the rumblings.
Well, the thing that set the Big 12 apart and was a function of the Longhorn Network being created was that the schools could own their tier 3 rights.
Right.
And that put Texas at a huge financial advantage, which they were already at, being Texas. And it's kind of what helped keep the conference together, but it's also what doomed the conference in many ways. But they started looking around for greener pastures, and you're right. The Pac-12 set all of this in motion by an effort to take Oklahoma, Texas, Oklahoma State, and Tech, I believe, were the four, and completely try to destroy the Big 12, basically due to the Big 12, what ended up happening to it.
Yep.
But they were going to be the proactive ones taking those schools, and they worked hard on it, and they had a yes, it was going to happen. And then it didn't happen. And then the Pac-12 backed up and said, okay, we will take Colorado and Utah. And what a great move adding Utah was. But I think we can now say that Colorado made a grave error in leaving the Big 12, because it thought its natural ties were to California. And maybe that's true for the student body. But when it comes to football, they needed Texas recruiting. And so did Nebraska need Texas recruiting. And they left that behind to a large degree and lost their kind of recruiting base. And here we are. I mean, Colorado football just fell on extremely hard times, but the Big 12 just kind of kept chugging forward, as we now know. And the raids didn't come all at once. It constantly gave the Big 12 an opportunity to recover and keep going forward.
Yeah, that was the thing, is that the Big 12 survived. It just kept pushing forward when things fell apart. But to talk about the Big 12, basically what it did was it just kind of, in my opinion, it kind of kowtowed to certain
Sorry.
schools to stay
Texas.
afloat.
Texas.
I know we've been talking. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. You're right. But it was Texas and to a lesser degree Oklahoma. But
Right.
Texas drove the narrative and constantly held their power over other member schools that might vote against what Texas wants, but they seem to vote in line because they wanted Texas to be happy and stay. They just completely buckled to Texas, and maybe that was the only formula, Big B, that was going to keep this conference intact until they departed for the SEC. But it wasn't pretty. It just wasn't, because Texas constantly got their way. And what we saw, and we can talk about this in the next segment, is once the commissioner, which in this case was Bob Bowlesby by that time, was free of Texas calling all the shots, the conference got better. It just absolutely found itself.
Yes, and that was where I was going, is like they kowtowed until they didn't have to or they didn't need to, and then all of a sudden the conference got better. And it's like you couldn't have had this foresight or this way of thinking earlier, but I think that part of that was leadership, because Dan Beebe, like we spoke about before, before we came on and started recordings, like he basically worked for Texas, and that was the former commissioner of the Big 12. I mean, he did everything in his power to have Texas. Oh, we can't lose. And maybe at the time, Fitz, maybe that was true. Maybe they couldn't leave or have Texas leave until the Big 12 got on sound footing. And maybe that's what they needed, was to do that, to stay on sound footing. Now, did it go way overboard with the Longhorn Network? Absolutely, because that thing has been a disaster, to say the least. But having said that, that's kind of how we got here, is the league was kowtowing. It started to get picked apart. It wasn't on good footing, and it started to get picked apart. That's the one that really that made me open my eyes, Fitz, the first team to lead was Nebraska.
Yeah.
Because Nebraska was a Big 8 staple. They're in the Big 12. They had success, especially on the football field, until they basically self-imploded by firing successful coaches. Whatever. But they had success. And then all of a sudden, it was like Nebraska got fed up with what was going on, and they thought, hold on a second. You guys don't deserve anything more than what we deserve, even though maybe our record hasn't been as good as yours. But the Nebraska was still really good at the time. And all of a sudden, Nebraska just says, you know what? We've had enough. We're going to leave. We're out of here. Big 12 or Big 10, better conference. We're out of here. More money. We're leaving.
Right.
I think if Nebraska could have stayed at the time and they evened things out or made things in their favor, I think Nebraska actually stays in the Big 12. Fitz, am I wrong?
No, you're not. I never understood why Nebraska, it was all about Texas, particularly for them, and getting away from Texas.
Right.
Because they felt like Texas was ruining its existence. But basically, Nebraska went from the power player, along with Oklahoma in the Big 8, to kind of getting shoved into the back a little bit by Texas, and then Oklahoma kind of staying at that level. They didn't like that at all, and I understand why. But then they joined a conference where they are a complete outsider, and they have no power. And we've seen it reflected now once they fired Bo Pelini, which I think we all know, according to the record, 22-10 in the Big 10. It was asinine to fire a coach like that, but his behavior, his persona didn't represent Nebraska in the way they wanted. There was stuff going on, with his brother being disruptive. It was more about personality than wins and losses, but boy, they never have recovered from that firing, because they've been pretty awful in the Big 10 since. And again, Big B, I think a part of it is they cashed in the Texas chips and started trying to recruit other areas. And sure, they've been in there a little bit, but boy, they just haven't got the same level of athlete or player that they did at the Big 12. And they have to ask themselves, was this really better for our institution? Those fans who were so famous for driving to road games now have fewer road games they can reach because they're on the far edge border of this new conference they're in. I just don't think it was a wise move. And the other side of that is, I think they're so prideful and think so much of their history that they'll never come back. They'll never admit the mistake.
Right.
let alone come back. And that's just going to seal their fate. Matt Rule's a great coach, but you're on that fringe of that conference, and I don't know if that's a great place to be.
The only thing that I would say about Matt Rule is that he's got relationships with Texas high school football coaches
Correct.
from that time. So he gets back in there, and I think he can start getting those kids going back to
Correct.
Nebraska. That's the one thing that I think is in their favor. If he can get it turned around, which he turned around Baylor, and Baylor was in such bad shape, and he was able to figure that out. He did it at Temple. I think if you give him an opportunity, but it's going to take a little bit. It's going to take some patience from Nebraska fans as well, and administration, because we've seen some things happen there. I mean, Trev Alberts, who Nebraska's loan, his the just the superstar hero of heroes. He takes the AD job, and he's there 18 months, Fitz, and he's out the door. Like, you people are crazy. I'm out of here. I'm not dealing with this. So, Nebraska's got some thinking to do. They got some stuff to figure out there, but hopefully they do figure that out. The other one that was a big surprise, I guess it wasn't so much a surprise. It was more of a, man, okay, this is real of what's happening to the Big 12, was Texas A&M. Now, I knew that they were tired of having to deal with what Texas was pulling. They were, and I don't blame them. The Longhorn Network was an absolute slap in their face. Just a slap. It was a slap in everybody in the conference's face, but especially to A&M and to Oklahoma. But for A&M, they just literally couldn't take it. And as soon as they got the opportunity, you have 13 teams in the SEC, we'll be 14. Or no, if they were the 13th team, they were like, if you guys want to expand, please take us. We will leave. We will leave right this very second. Just let us know. And they did. And more power to them. I don't know how it's worked out for them, but I think it's kind of been close to the same. I mean, they weren't at the top of the food chain in the Big 12, and they're not at the top of the food chain in the SEC. It's worked out because they've gotten more money, but their brand isn't any bigger by being in the SEC. I mean, it's still the same, but for them, this has to be the nightmare scenario, Texas going to the SEC. Lord have mercy.
Yeah, no, and it's fueling speculation that A&M will jump to the Big Ten.
Absolutely.
Which I think is insane. But, they felt like they needed to get away from Texas. I don't think they feel different about that now. It is a rivalry so intense that they don't even want to see each other. Right. They just, A&M has, they have little brother syndrome to the nth degree, and they can't quite manage being in the conference with Texas. And the fact that the SEC told them we won't take any more Texas teams and then took Texas, that was a slap in the face. Yeah. So we'll see what their future holds. Overall, their record, they've held up okay in the SEC. A lot of it was Johnny Manziel, fueled because he was so electric and led them to a couple great seasons. But they too have fallen on hard times. They tried to swing for the fences with Jimbo Fisher and spent a lot of money for very little. Mm-hmm. And now they're starting again. And we'll see if this helps them. I think Texas A&M, oddly, I think they will benefit from Texas being in the conference, because it'll feel like to more kids that they're going to play in Texas more often, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because when you were at A&M, you play your home games, but then you left the state for another game, unless it was a non-conference game. And I think it might help them having Texas in the conference. I'm sure they will disagree. We'll see how it plays out over the next 5 to 10 years. But I think A&M made a mistake, but it hasn't hurt them as much as the other schools.
Right. And then the last team, well, I shouldn't say the last team, of the first round of teams that left, Missouri. And Missouri has to feel like they just hit the lottery.
Yeah.
To go into the SEC. I mean, there were talks about them possibly going to the Big Ten, but they were not one of the power brokers in the Big 12. They just weren't. They weren't. I'm not saying they weren't a successful program or athletic department or anything like that. They just weren't one of the power brokers. And when the SEC came calling, they probably said yes before the SEC even got it out of their mouth to invite them to the conference, which they should have said yes. That's how excited they should have been. But at that time, Fitz, I thought the Big 12 was going to be over. When a team like Missouri is leaving and the SEC is taking them, I thought, okay, well, this is it. Because if Missouri's going, and again, it's not a knock on Missouri, they just weren't a power player within the conference. When they're leaving, well, then everybody else is just going to come and start picking these teams off. And I thought, okay, well, the Big 12 is completely finished. But again, more power to Missouri for getting the invitation and doing whatever they happened to do to be in that position.
Yeah. And you know what? They had moderate success in the Big 12. They never made it to the title game, but they go to the SEC and I believe it was Coach Binkle had them winning games and, winning divisions. They kind of blew up the argument that the SEC is just better than everyone in the Big 12 when someone from the Big 12 can just stumble into the neighborhood and start winning games. Now that they fell on hard times, I think Coach Drinkwitz has them going in the right direction. Last year was certainly a breakthrough season. This is the one school that I understand 100% why they made the change. Again, they got away from Texas, but it's kind of a geographical oddity that I've experienced myself starting my journalism career in Missouri. Missouri is a southern state. When you're in Missouri, you feel like you're in a southern state. Right. And it should be Midwest, but it really kind of associates itself with the South, particularly south of I-70. Yeah. And of course, Columbia sits on I-70. So I think this was a natural move for them. I know they were coveting the Big Ten. And look, that might still be possible. If A&M goes, does Missouri follow to the Big Ten? Does Kansas follow? That's really one of the few changes I see ahead. Does Utah get that invite if they add 2 more schools? We'll see how that all takes place in the future. But I think Missouri greatly enhanced itself by opening up all those southern recruiting grounds to themselves while still doing a great job in the Kansas City and St. Louis areas.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we're going to take our first break here, and on the other side of this, we're going to dive in to more of the football aspect of each of these schools and what it looks like, and we're going to throw in Texas and OU as well because now, obviously, they have left the Big 12. So we'll talk about that and more on the other side of this once we hear a word from our partners, Synergy Financial Partners.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Again, this is Big B, Brien Hanley with Tim Fitzgerald. So on this hour or this segment here, Fitz, let's talk about, on the football side of this thing. Camp is about to start everywhere, so I feel like we need to start getting into more of this football talk. So first off, the grass wasn't necessarily greener for everybody that left the Big 12. No. And we'll just start here. Colorado has been an absolute disaster. Outside of a season, it has been a disaster. What an in conference, 28-84 since they have left the Big 12. Now, look, I get that Colorado Fitz was on the downswing in the Big 12, but they weren't that bad. They were middle of the road, still had competitive teams. They have not, that's not competitive, 28-84. They have just been a disaster since they have gone to the Pac-12. It's just been awful.
It was a huge mistake in terms of how their football team was treated. Maybe on the academic side, they felt like it was a great advantage being tied to those West Coast research type schools. I don't know. All I do is talk about athletics, and this was not good for Colorado athletics. No. They, despite their heart being in California, their feet were in Texas and the Midwest with their recruiting, and they made some bad hires. They moved into the Pac-12, and instead of carrying over the importance of college football that we sense in the Big 12, they kind of adopted the Pac-12's. We're going to try to be good. Right. We're going to hire this guy. We like this guy. They just fell into that trap, and it just didn't work for them. I've said for a long time they were the most logical of the 4 departures to return, and they have. And I think that's good for Colorado. I think it's great for the Big 12 because it's a Big 8 school. They're recovering.
Yes.
I wish there was 2 others that they could recover, but I don't see that happening. And now we've got the conference that we do, and I think it's a pretty good position.
Yeah, I think so too. It'd be good for Colorado because, look, for me, and in the Pac-12, for the most part, are urban area schools. I mean, Tucson, fairly big city. I'm not saying it's metropolis or anything, but then you got Tempe, which is just out, is a suburb of Phoenix.
Right.
And yeah, Boulder is a suburb of Denver, but it's far enough away, kind of like Lawrence. It's a college town where Lawrence is close to Kansas City, but it is a college town. Boulder's the same way. It's close to Denver, but it's a college town, and it has that college feel. And a lot of the Pac-12 schools don't have that because they are in urban cities. I'm not saying that you can't have that college feel. I'm just saying the cities that they reside in, outside of what Corvallis for Oregon State and, Pullman for Washington State, outside of those, for the most part, the schools are in urban type settings. And Colorado, to me, is much more of a fit in what the university is altogether as a whole in the Big 12. But yeah, it was a mistake. And I think they would admit that now. That now that they're back, they would admit it. But, sometimes you make a mistake and you got to learn. But the grass was definitely not greener going to the Pac-12.
Oh.
Nebraska, same way. Look, Nebraska's problems, and I've said this for the better part of almost 2 decades now, Nebraska's problems started when they fired Frank Solich. That did just end the story. I don't care what anyone. Then when you fire a guy, at the time you were playing 11 games a year. You fire a guy that's averaging winning 9 games a year. That's not good enough. And then you've got problems. And he went to a national championship game. I understand they got embarrassed in that game. But who wasn't going to get embarrassed by that Miami team? Everybody was going to get embarrassed by that Miami team. So you fire that guy, and the wheels have just been spinning. Then you get a Bo Pelini in there, gets it turned around, Fitz. Nope, can't have that guy here. And it has just been just a train wreck. And the problem with Nebraska fans, Fitz, they don't understand. They won't realize that it's a train wreck. They keep thinking that it's 1996, and it's not. I'm sorry. It's not 1997. It isn't the 90s anymore. You got to get that out of your mind. It's sad to see this once proud program. But you mentioned it, the recruiting. What are you going to do? Hopefully Matt Rule, like I said, he's got those ties to the Texas high schools. So hopefully he can get it turned around. But their record, what is it, 50-61? Yeah, not good. Not good for Nebraska.
No, it's not. I think the 2 schools that moved to the SEC have done themselves a favor. I mean, I think it worked out okay.
Yeah.
Certainly on the ledger, the financial ledger, it looks great because you're making more money. We're seeing Missouri ramp up. For the life of me, I don't understand how Texas A&M isn't able to consistently win. It's not the SEC. It's self-inflicted.
Yeah.
Keep doing stupid crap. And I just find that interesting. Those Big 12 conversions into the SEC had no problem competing. How is the SEC better from top to bottom than the Big 12? Because I don't think if those schools remained in the Big 12, they would have been running the conference. They would have been kind of in the pack, or they have been. So I do think those schools kind of helped themselves at the very least because of finances. Nebraska wrecked itself. It's dismantled most of its history in the fact that while they feel like it's still the 1990s, the rest of the world knows it's not and knows that they haven't been competitive. And now that they finally hired a coach that I think is going to get them going, oh yeah, now we just brought in a bunch of other schools that are going to be competitive, and it's going to make your life even harder. So I think these schools made emotional reactions, and honestly, Texas thought when they left with Oklahoma that would destroy the conference, and it hasn't. Right. It hasn't. That actually the most damage Texas did to this conference wasn't when they left. It's when the other schools left and they blocked the expansion of the conference back to 12 and said, no, West Virginia and TCU is enough, and let's go with 10. And that was all Texas flexing their muscles and getting the Texas voters and other people to follow along, when in reality, if this conference had added Louisville and Cincinnati with those two other schools at the time, I think this conference would be in really good setting right now. They'd have a really strong athletics department in Louisville, and Cincinnati would be even further down the road than what they are going to be.
Yep.
So I think that was the most damage Texas did, was blocking the expansion to 12, not them departing. I think this has just kind of changed the dynamic of the conference, but I think it's still a really strong, hyper competitive conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you mentioned, A&M 52-45, Missouri 47-51, and you mentioned it. Missouri had success early when they went to the SEC. A&M has just kind of been on that steady streak. Johnny Football took off. They had a Heisman winner. Missouri's had a plethora of guys go to the NFL. So it's not like, and Missouri was doing that when they were in the Big 12 too. They were having guys going to the NFL left and right. So it's never been that Missouri couldn't compete. It was just they couldn't get over the hump. And there's the same thing now. You also mentioned this too, Fitz. In Texas A&M, I just don't understand. You have just as much money as anybody else out there as far as an athletic program, and you can't figure this out. You have access to the same people that Texas has access to. So it's not, you can't say, well, you can't get into these doors. Sure you can, but they just can't figure it out. But again, they made a horrible hire, Jimbo Fisher. He had stopped recruiting at Florida State. That's why Florida State was fine to let him go. They wanted him to leave. They were fine with that because he stopped recruiting. And then you bring him in, and it didn't work. It was a disaster. And to pay that kind of money to have a guy walk out the door, that alone, Fitz, tells you how much money they have. You're willing to pay that to get him to leave, to not coach anymore? Come on now. What are we doing? So, the grass wasn't greener obviously for Colorado and Nebraska. A&M and Missouri, as an athletic budget side, yes. But on the field, I think it's kind of been the same. I really do. Now, here's my big question, Fitz, and me and you may differ on this. What do you think Texas and OU? Well, I'll go first.
Okay.
I think Texas is going to be really good this year, and I think Sarkisian has got it turned around.
Yep.
They gave OU maybe the toughest schedule in the entire country.
Yep.
So it's going to be tough. OU fans may not want Brent Venables to be around. If they can't win at least 8 games this year, they may say, you know what, we've had enough already in year 2 or year 3. They may be done with them. Having said that, OU's always been the better program than Texas. Always.
Absolutely.
And when they get it turned around, it might take them a couple years to get this figured out. I think OU is going to be better than Texas. I just do. I mean, traditionally, it always has been better than Texas, other than a quick run where Texas was really good, kind of the Vince Young, Colt McCoy years. But outside of that, even then, OU was right there with them. OU's always been better. I think they're going to be fine when they get in the SEC.
I agree. I mean, I think Texas, the timing was perfect. I mean, Sark's got him going. He's recruiting at a high level. I think Texas is going to thrive in the SEC. I do. Mm-hmm. I think Oklahoma will get better, but Oklahoma is going to run into this trap that they just gave Venables a new contract.
Yeah, they did.
So do you fire him if they go 7-5 this season?
Think so.
I don't think you can.
Doesn't make sense.
So now you either just threw away money. Yeah, we're making more money in the SEC. How many years of more revenue from being in the SEC did Texas A&M just throw down the sewer when they had to fire and buy out Jimbo?
Exactly.
I mean, are you really financially ahead? You spent more, but you didn't win more.
Nope.
And I don't understand the new contract for Brent. I'm a big fan of Brent, but he hasn't done what you would think you would need to do to get a contract extension. Year 3 seems to be the time to prove yourself that you deserve a contract extension. And he ain't going to do it with this schedule. It's just the schedule. Man. They found out what life's going to be like in the SEC. I don't know that it was intentional, but it sure feels like Texas got set up for success and OU got set up to be set up to lose. I mean, they just got set up.
the thing about it is that, because we constantly get on here and we defend the Big 12 because the Big 12 deserves to be defended
Right.
on how good it is from top to bottom. And we say the SEC is top heavy. Okay. And I still believe that to be true. The difference is OU got all the top heavy.
Yeah.
They have to play all of those teams. They didn't get to play, the Vanderbilts. They didn't get that kind of schedule. They got all the best teams literally in the SEC. That's the difference. That's why we're talking like this, because there's going to be some people that are going to make some comments. Well, you always talk about that the SEC is not as good from top to bottom. Well, yeah, OU's playing all the top teams. Alabama doesn't play all the top teams. LSU and Georgia, they don't have to play all the top teams. Alabama does, or Oklahoma does, and that's
Crazy.
brutal. It's just brutal your first year in the conference.
It's crazy, man. It's insane. But I'll say this. We've criticized the SEC for being top heavy. I think these two schools, Texas and Oklahoma, help resolve that. I think Texas will be competing at a high level. I think Oklahoma can get there, but they certainly will be in that upper middle area at some point. And I think they kind of help themselves by adding these two schools, at least on paper and at least with TV contracts. I think the Big Ten, with what they did in the offseason, really helped themselves because they filled a giant gap beneath, Ohio State, Michigan, and maybe Penn State. They brought in some schools that can be in that level or below, and they don't really have that in that conference. So, but we cover the Big 12, and the Big 12 has found a way to survive every time by adding valuable institutions. And they find institutions like UCF and BYU that have an enormous upside.
Absolutely.
An enormous upside. You can sit here and say, well, you suck now, but I want to talk about this. Unless the revenue gets completely out of control and out of whack, if the Big 12 does add some more schools that bring value, I'd like to see what some of these schools are doing in 10 years, because I bet you UCF is going to be an athletic monster that has to be dealt with, or maybe they'll become Texas A&M, a huge fan base, a huge enrollment. And now that we got the money, we're going to spend it poorly. Who knows? But the story of the Big 12 is being survivors and fighting through the hard times. And to get a little misty-eyed and syrupy here, it kind of goes with being ag schools. You can't control the rain; you have to deal with it, and that's kind of the fortitude the Big 12 has shown through drought and torrential downfalls. They just kept going. They didn't go out of business. They didn't quit. They didn't give up as a group. They just kept on moving, and now here we are with a 16-team conference that maybe it'll get realigned again. Maybe Utah's right, and the super conference is coming. I don't think so, Big B. I don't think we're going to see the super conference. I think at the end of the day that's not what the networks will really want, and we'll see how that plays out. But I think the Big 12, as we head into this season, is going into an unknown because we don't know how it all is going to add up. But I like the pieces. I think this is going to be a really entertaining football.
Absolutely, Fitz. Couldn't have said it any better. And that brings us to our second break. And we're going to come back after this, and we're going to talk about how we believe that the Big 12 is going to fare this year. And is the Big 12 better off with all the teams that have left? Is the Big 12 a better conference for it with all the teams that left, who they have brought in? We'll take a look at that after we have a word from our sponsor, Synergy Financial Partners.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Look, Fitz, we talked a lot about the SEC. We talked about the Big 12, how we got to where we are. If we look at the football side of this thing, I just believe that the Big 12 is still better off. I know we lost some big names. I understand that part of it, but again, we've mentioned this several times, and I'll keep beating this drum. Strength is in numbers. If you don't have the blue blood programs, which the Big 12 doesn't have that anymore, then have as many really, really good and competitive football teams as possible. And that's what the Big 12 has right now. Look, you can talk about the Utahs, the Kansas States. Kansas is going to be good and seems like they're going to be good in the future if they can continue this hot streak of what Lance Leipold has going on there. Arizona looks like they might have turned the corner. You know how I feel about Mike Gundy, about his coaching ability. I think he's the best coach in the conference for what he's been able to do, and it's only going to keep building. I think there's other, you mentioned UCF. UCF has an opportunity here. There's plenty of schools, Texas Tech, TCU, that can all vie and compete. I just think the Big 12 is going to be better off. And again, it's going to be a super exciting conference. And the reason that I believe it's going to be better off is because we understand what we are, and if when you understand who you are and you play to your strengths, that's when you can thrive. When you're relying on maybe one or two to pull everybody with them versus everybody going together, which is what the Big 12 is going to do, I think that's just better for the conference overall.
Look, this is perception versus reality. Perception from the outside is Texas and Oklahoma ran the conference, and that's not the reality, particularly in the last 4 years. Did Oklahoma go on a long streak of being dominant? Yes, they did. They absolutely were great. And then they decided to change coaches, and it just hasn't been the same for Oklahoma. So again, I go back to this over the last 4 seasons. And why is that important? Because that covers the players that are in the conference now. If you were a true freshman 4 seasons ago, it means you're a redshirt senior this year.
Right.
And over those last 4 seasons, we've seen 7 different teams make the Big 12 title game, Oklahoma State being the only duplicate. And Texas won their first one in a while this past season. They haven't run this conference. This conference has been competitive, hyper competitive over the last 4 years. And now you take out Texas and Oklahoma from the conference, and I recognize Texas is probably as good as it's been since Vince Young.
Yeah.
They have made a good move at the right time, and it's going to add up for them. But you bring in Utah, and I don't care what the brand might be less than Texas, but Utah on a consistent basis is going to be better than what Texas was year to year in this conference.
Yep.
And I think now we're seeing other programs elevate themselves, maybe to reach up and match what Oklahoma did. So this conference is fine. It's good. And again, if you're a sports bettor, you will either flock to the Big 12 for these competitive games or avoid it like all hell, because you won't be able to tell what's going on. But it's going to be great football. And I bet you at the end of the day, fans are going to start flipping over to, watch Big 12 games because they are entertaining and not blowouts.
Absolutely. More exciting football. It's more, I'm not going to say it's more of a down home feel or anything like that. I don't want to get into that because now you're disrespecting other fan bases, right, and that kind of stuff. It's just the Big 12 tends to take care of their own. Not that anybody else doesn't, but we look out for us. We play a certain style of football, but it's super, super exciting. Anybody can win each week.
Right.
And again, we're just talking about the football aspect of this. I don't think there's any need to talk about the basketball aspect of this, because if you watch any college basketball at all, you know that the Big 12 destroys any other conference as far as competition level. So
bottom, yep.
that part is what it is. But football, it'll be fine. And the more important thing is, and I've said this on a couple occasions, Fitz, I'm just ready for them to kick the ball off.
No doubt.
I am ready for them to get it going. Camps are starting up this week all over the country. I am ready for football to get going. We basically have a month, people. We got a month until it all goes down. And for me, Fitz, I'm just excited for it to be here. I'm excited to see what this conference can do. We outlined some of those early games, and maybe next week we go back and we take a look at those and maybe do an even deeper dive and look at some of those early key games and talk specifically about them and what it will mean for the conference, because we got some opportunities early. We really do. The Big 12's got some opportunities, man, to put their best foot forward and say, hey, we're going to be a player in this thing. I know we lost Texas and OU, but that doesn't mean anything. We're still a very, very good conference. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. One final thought for me, Big B. the Big 12 has never been more in lockstep than right now.
Yeah.
Through everything this conference has gone through. And look, I recognize that Utah is like they'd rather be somewhere else. But I think now that they've had media days, and now that we're getting closer to football, I think that will diminish and they'll live in the moment a little bit better. It's just, I understand it's really hard to see the Pac-12 go away after you were so effective in that conference moving up. It's impressive what they've done. But I see this conference as really healthy from a like a social aspect. They all get along. They all want to be together. They understand their place in college athletics, and they're embracing that. Now, would they jump at the SEC and Big Ten? Sure, everyone would because of the money disparity. But I think Brett Yormark also recognizes an ability to maybe leverage more conference drama like happened in the Pac-12. If you're not in lockstep nowadays, you're probably going to come apart.
Right.
And the ACC's got a lot to fix. I think we're seeing the Big Ten, some of those bottom feeders, if you want to call them that, are beginning to get a little nervous that they're going to be dismissed from the conference. And that's after the ACC situation settled, where they strengthen and stay together or have some departures. Once that's settled, that's the next move in conference realignment, unless it's the Super League. Can these two big conferences keep the dead weight on?
Right.
Do you keep carrying Vanderbilt? Do you keep carrying some of the brands in the Big Ten that should be better but aren't?
Right.
Or do you dump them off and go get other schools? Particularly if the ACC's got brands available, do you say, look, it was great, but it didn't work out. You're out. It'll be cold, but greed knows no end and knows no boundaries that belong in civil behavior. They will just eat their own if they have to make another buck.
Absolutely, they will. It'll be unfortunate, but I just got a feeling that's probably what's going to end up happening. But either way, I'm ready for the season to get going. I'm ready for all of this to just be put on the back burner so we can have a great athletic season, not just football, but all sports in general, football, volleyball, basketball, all the sports. Just put this on the back burner for a while. We got a month till we get there, people. The Big 12 is going to be exciting. Just lock in once it gets going. We got a lot of new stuff that's going to be coming out too, people, just so you guys know. We are putting some stuff together for some shows all during the season. Once the season gets here, we're going to go back to 5 days a week as far as the shows are concerned. We'll have different lineups and that sort of thing and different topics for each day so you guys know exactly what's coming. We get down the road here a little bit in the next week or two. We'll start rolling some of that out to let you know what it is. So, again, as always, remember to like, follow, subscribe, and continue to leave those comments. We love going back and forth with you guys. We will see you tomorrow. This is the Big 12 Insiders.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.